Thanks, Sarah. Well, good evening, everyone. We're so excited to have you here in our virtual vertical. This is the last installment of our three-part series, and this is how the communicators communicate. A lot of you have written to us and sent us DMs, and it's all around communication. So, what should I be saying? What should I be refraining from my vocabulary at this time? And we think that this is a conversation not only for small businesses, but just as the world is continuing to have this conversation around our unusual and uncertain times. So we encourage you to make this conversation interactive. Although we have our experts here in our webinar, we do want to see some of your questions, and your questions can also guide our conversation. So I am going to, because our experts and people in the webinar are their own storytellers, they're some of the best storytellers out there, I'm going to hand it over to them. I just wanted to say welcome to Siobhan, Mariana, and Alencia for just joining us. I appreciate your time. I know all of you are really, really busy with your own work schedules, but I just wanted to open it up to you all to introduce yourselves.
Thank you so much. Yeah. I think we all agreed in the beginning that any invite from Rakia Reynolds and her team is something that we're always going to say yes to. And
Absolutely.
talking about messaging and communications, yes is a word that we need more in our vocabulary, especially nowadays. So I'll go ahead and start briefly. My name is Mariana Atencio. I am a Peabody Award-winning journalist. I am an author. I have my baby here in Spanish and English, Perfectly You, which I released last year. And I'm also a public speaker. I have a TED Talk that I gave 3 years ago that has been seen more than 12 million times around the world and translated in 13 languages, and I still can't believe it. So in terms of messaging, anything that is news, breaking news, but also authenticity, journalism, and how to inspire people in this time is within my realm.
Awesome. Thanks. Alencia?
Awesome. I'm so glad to be here. And hey, everyone, Alencia Johnson. I'm a political and cultural strategist. Most recently, I spent time as Senator Elizabeth Warren's National Director of Public Engagement for her presidential campaign, and had the opportunity to translate her policy into real world experiences, into what it means for women, people of color, young people, LGBTQ communities, from events to media to who are some of our biggest surrogates and advocates out there. Figuring out the through line of the message and how the message translates to who you're talking to. Before that, I spent 6 years at Planned Parenthood Federation of America and Planned Parenthood Action Fund. That is actually where I got to meet Rakia. We did some work together. And I spent 6 years building the constituency communications team, which focused on how are we talking about reproductive freedom and agency of our bodies and communities of color, young people, communities of faith, LGBTQ folks. How do more people see themselves within that movement? And so if you're familiar with the Stand with Black Women hashtag and t-shirt, I helped design that brand along with another small business owner, Deanna Dorsey of District of Clothing, who designed this t-shirt as well, and did a lot of work with cultural influencers, the entertainment industry, and major corporations to talk about reproductive freedom and sexuality. And we can talk about this a little bit later at Planned Parenthood when we decided to have the show on Keeping Up with the Kardashians, which some people thought was controversial, but if we're talking about messaging and getting your message out there to the most people, you kind of have to use some unique tactics. And before that, I spent time on President Obama's re-election campaign and at Geico's headquarters doing communications. One of the things I believe in is most of the time, it's not necessarily the message, it's the messenger. And so we'll talk about some of that today and what that really means.
Awesome. Thanks, Alencia. Siobhan?
Hi, so my name is Siobhan Messiah. By day, I work for a tech company, and I lead the events for our sales and revenue partners, so people who advertise to work with us. And I also am the events chair for our internal business resource group for celebrating the African American diaspora. But by night, I am a content creator. I'm the creator of Just Call Me Sayo, which is actually my handle on all social media. when you look at my name, it's spelled a little funny. So usually I get a bunch of variations of it. Sioban, Sioban, Sioban. So in college, Temple University, where I met Rakia, I kind of TMF, but we keep it clean here. I adapted the nickname Sio or Sio because people call me Sioban or Sioban. So it was just a little bit easier. People would know how to get to me. That was easier for them to adapt to. And that's why Just Call Me Sio has become my handle and become my baby with my website. So it's a collection of all my work and skill sets that I've learned over the years, working in many different industries, jobs, building your communities professionally and personally. It's a collection of my writing and how I can help you, your business grow, making sure that you're making the right connections and relationship management to really take yourself from someone who's making money to a business. So that's pretty much the long and short of it. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Siobhan, you've always been, I would just say, just from knowing you before the Instagrams and all of that, you've always been a content person. So thank you so much for joining us. I want to get right into it. A lot of folks, again, have had this question of, what to say, how to say it, and when, in this climate. I'd love for everybody to understand, we all experience this major shift at the same time. How, for all of you, how did your work shift and how did you adapt to the shift in the very beginning?
So it's been seismic, I think, for everybody. For me specifically, so I delve in three sort of industries: traditional journalism, which, as we've seen, journalists are literally doing this and doing live TV packages from their homes. The ability to talk to people face to face in the streets, that kind of interview. I would usually parachute into natural disasters like Hurricane Dorian in the Bahamas, and for me, that hug that I was able to give people to tell them thank you for sharing your story, we're not able to do that today. So for me, that was the hardest thing, I think, to get over as a journalist. TV has adapted, I think, quickly, but I think we need to continue innovating. And then in terms of the motivational speaking part of it, last year I went to speak at the LinkedIn annual conference. I went to Microsoft. I went to Spotify. This year I had events, and I can be open about it, at HBO. I was going to go to Microsoft again in Vancouver, and all of that was just canceled out of the blue. So that was income that I was hoping to receive for me and my company, and that was a shock. Like, how do we get over this? Mm-hmm. And we're at a point where we're done waiting for this to pass because we don't know when it's going to pass. And we have that moment of reckoning as communicators and as a company here at Go Like, which is the production company that I co-founded, saying, this is the new reality. We need to quickly develop tools to adapt. And that has meant, how can we now do these massive events that sometimes have over 4,000 people virtually and still have the same energy and that same sense of, I think, that screen time should be humanizing. And then in terms of books, I'm working on my second book because obviously we have a lot of time to write, and it's also thinking about what kind of stories, words, myths do people need in this time for us to make sense of the world. I think stories and language help us make sense of the world around us. So I'm also interested to see the new storytellers that are going to emerge from this. And I encourage you at home to take notes and empower yourself, because I never thought that I would write a book. Rakia knows it, let alone a book in Spanish and English, and it found its audience. So everyone has a story worth sharing, and hopefully here, and I'm sure the three of us are going to give you important tools to be able to do that.
Thank you. And Alencia, I know, you and I have been talking just about like shifts and things like that. How do you think some of the work that you were doing before might change or has changed since our shift?
Yeah, most of my work, actually all of my work, has been centered in what is impact driven. How will it impact people's day-to-day lives? How are we translating policy to what people are going through every day? And it's an interesting time when our country got really serious around COVID-19. Was also the same time that Senator Elizabeth Warren's presidential campaign, we suspended the campaign. And so in that shift to having conversations about the election cycle, having conversations about Supreme Court cases around DACA or abortion rights, in that conversation about what is our country doing about COVID-19, you know, a lot of the requests that I was getting for media interviews or whatever it may be, shifted to how does COVID-19 impact all of these issues that we're talking about on a day-to-day basis, that activists are fighting for, that, you know, I speak on several panels any given year, and most of the time it's related to an issue that people are caring about at the time. And so how are they connected? And so what I've been working on lately is working with organizations and issue-based folks how are they breaking through this media cycle? And so, you know, one of the things that I would encourage folks to remember is that we're all actually going through this together. And so we do have to have a level of compassion, because quite frankly, we can be inundated with so much media. And to be honest, if I'm watching MSNBC or CNN or on Twitter, within 30 minutes, I am like, I'm grieving, literally, I'm grieving because it's so heavy. And so to be conscious of that personally, but also for the message that we're trying to get out there, okay, we're talking about COVID-19, but we're also talking about the fact that health centers that provide, you know, wellness checkups for women, or our food pantries, these are all being limited because of whatever restrictions are happening in that jurisdiction. So we have to kind of figure out a way to have a conversation about the things that are still impacting people while also in this new reality, because as Mariana said, we don't know when this is going to end. And the other thing that I keep thinking about is that some of the issues that I would always try to bring to the forefront are also heavy in their own right, whether we're talking about criminal justice reform, we're talking about families being separated, we're talking about climate change. Earth Day was just yesterday, right? Those are all significantly magnified under COVID-19. So how do we have that balance that isn't also bringing another level of grief, but also showing that all of our issues are intersectional and they are also real to us? And so I would encourage folks, if we're talking about certain things that might have a significant impact, positive or particularly negative, to just have a little more compassion around it, and think about your audience and think about what is it that they're trying to receive that day, and to not over inundate them with some of those things.
Alencia, have you gotten, like, I literally had a meeting before this panel, and it was said to me, like, you know, people also need a silver lining nowadays. Like, can you change this to be a little more like good spirited? And you're like, well, you know, when you're talking about, nobody's talking about kids in cages, or nobody's talking about DACA, or nobody's talking about all these things that, as you say, relate to COVID, and they're not fluffy, you know?
Yep.
What do you say to that? Do you say, like, this is the reality, or do you try to make it a little more, I guess, I don't even know what the word is, sugar-coated a little bit?
Yeah, you know, I think the piece that you mentioned of humanizing, and I think all of us have had this opportunity to bring in some of the storytellers, right? So we're talking about these issues, but what about the foot soldiers, the people who are actually in the trenches doing the work to bring some of these issues to light, like your Brittany Packens of the world, and folks like that, who are actually trying to work with communities and bring a sense of awareness to what is happening. Because I think, to your point, you know, we're seeing what's happening in major cities or in rural communities, which we're not even talking about when it's related to the virus. But then we go to the border and look what's happening to children, or we hear the numbers about the prison population. Actually, let's have a conversation about the people in the middle, the people who are doing the work. There's this, and I have to think of her name, I'll put it in the chat, but she does this like on-the-go beauty salon situation for the LA homeless, where she like, I think you guys, I forget her name on Instagram, Beauty to something. I will share it with everyone. But it's so beautiful because she takes water and shampoo and stuff, and she used to go and do the hair for homeless women in LA. And now her and her team are going out there and they're bringing food, they're bringing resources to people, because obviously you need to socially distance and we can't, do our hair. But bringing those stories brings awareness to the situation that people are already dealing with that is definitely compounded with COVID-19. But it shows the humanity. It shows the people who are able to fill the gap and do what they can. Also showing the success stories. I was reading somewhere about people who have fortunately been released from jail early because they were in jail waiting on just bond, right?
Mhm.
And they were released to their family. How about we share the story of what has happened? And also, how about we talk a little bit more about some of the people who have recovered, whether directly from the virus or small businesses, as we're talking to small business owners who have been able to redirect their services to help impact either COVID-19 or the people who are marginalized and don't have anywhere else to go.
Yeah, I think we're gonna talk about that. You were talking about the West Coast, and I wanted to say, Siobhan, you're on the West Coast right now, right?
Yes, right now, yeah. So I'm on the West Coast. A lot of my clients and partners I've worked with are in the East, or actually it's global. But for my day job, the business side, I thrive on a routine. So the shift has been kind of a mess. And then from the creativity side, I draw on a lot of the inspiration of my environment, the people I'm around, just walking. So that storytelling portion is also missing. So I thought I can just go business as usual when all of this happened. And I was very humbled very quickly because this wasn't going anywhere anytime soon. And I had to adapt. Luckily, my company is amazing. My manager and my directors are amazing. And they are a constant reminder that we cannot figure this out on a day-to-day basis. So literally, we've been all saying hour by hour. I've had to become open. I've had to become flexible. I've had to become very honest with myself. We always kind of have the mentality to push through and we can do it or we got to get it done, but we've never been in this situation. How do you push through a pandemic? So it's just kind of we have to stop and be honest with ourselves. And when it comes to me being creative, I tweeted the other day that I feel like my creativity has been gone. It's just been so hard for me to write, and writing is second nature to me. So even just to go off of what you were talking, Mariana, you can't force anything. You have to be authentic to yourself, the messaging you're trying to put out, what you are trying to create. So yes, like Alencia said, there's a bunch of different stories, and something is going to connect with you and your authentic story that you are trying to put out. Don't force the silver light and the Lisa Frank stickers and the rainbows and all that other stuff, because it's not who you are and it's not the space that we're in. So putting that out, it almost seems sometimes if you force it too much, it seems like it's not empathetic. It's like, okay, well, great. Thank you for showing me this fluffy dog, but also at the same time, my family's in the hospital on a respirator. So where's the balance? Do not force any messaging. And that's one of the biggest shifts that I've also had to learn, is make sure that I'm authentic in everything that I do, from my 9 to 5 to my 5 to 9.
You know what, Siobhan, you bring up something that just came to mind. One of a very older writer, it's called the Robert Collier principle. He talks about this theory, and Alencia, you're probably like, yep, I know Robert Collier. He wrote, during wartime. He was a brilliant writer and helped to shift perception and perspective. And one of his quotes is centered around always enter the conversation that is occurring in someone else's mind, right? So that's how you enter the conversation. You don't make it about yourself. You enter the conversation. Uh-oh, there might be a little bit of echo. Can you guys hear echo? There might be a little bit of echo. Can you guys hear echo? You're good. Y'all take off my headphones. It might be me. How am I sounding now?
Our conversation in our minds right here.
Yeah, and I'm really entering it. But I think the conversation, everyone is having the same conversation. And I have to tell you, as a communications professional, I do cringe when I see people use words like lockdown. When you said the prison system, Alencia, I'm looking at, social media, Siobhan, where you spend a lot of your time, and Mariana, you're interviewing people and you're writing stories. And I see a lot of people using the wrong lexicon for today. And I do want to dive into that. It's like you are not, some of you are not in lockdown. You were sheltering in place. You were quarantining. You were social distancing. So I do want to talk about the importance of words mattering, and maybe if we can just go around, like what are some phrases and words that you've seen right now that you're like, hey, let's stop using that.
So,
well, you know,
sorry, I just wanted to jump in because a lot of people, they're on this, they're probably laughing listening, because one of my favorite phrases is words means things. Like literally, it's not what you think a word means, it is what the word means. There's a dictionary for a reason. So I think that people put things out into the world, especially social media, and they're not intentional about their wording at all. They don't know what it means, and a lot of people think they know how to communicate, but they're not actually saying anything. So it's just, you don't know how to communicate actually. Just because words are coming out, you're not saying a single thing. And it's just words like difference. I've had this conversation, prison between jail. Those are two completely different things. Completely different things. When people are saying quarantine, like you said, lockdown, shelter in place, yes, those things are completely different, and you can't use them interchangeably. You can't do that because some people's severity is different. One of the things that has been heavy on me lately, and it's because of my personal experience during this COVID, is people talking about ventilators and oxygen. My whole family actually tested positive for COVID in New York, literally from my grandmother down to my youngest brother. Thank God they are all fine, like, thank God. But a lot of people, when I was talking to them who work or had experienced something with COVID, they would be like, well, make sure they're okay. They can't get a ventilator. And I'm like, all right, well, that's true. But if your oxygen is low, you can still get an oxygen mask. Those are readily available. But it's kind of like they're telling people you shouldn't even go to the hospital. There's no ventilators. And I'm like, ventilators are for people who need assistance in taking and outtaking air. So for people who are in the hospital or have family that's in the hospital, that can be triggering, because it's like, what's going on with your family? You can't visit them. A lot of times you can't even call them. If you go to the hospital quickly, most likely you're not thinking about a phone or a charger. So you have no contact with them, and you're hearing all this scary wording, all these especially health professionals that are on any platform using the wrong terms. I think there's a responsibility when you consider yourself an expert or a professional in the field to use the right terms. So those medical terms and those medical things that are being put onto different platforms and being used wrong, those are the things that I think are the most triggering and kind of just like, what are you doing to me on platforms? Like, at least know the terms in your field at the bare minimum to me.
Yeah.
I think, you mentioned the prison, the lockdown, that language. If folks are on Twitter and paying attention, I think it was last week or so, Ellen DeGeneres said on her show, it feels like I'm in prison or something. And people actually pushed back on that, because to the point that you made, Rakia, it is actually a privilege that we are able to be sheltered in place.
Yeah, absolutely.
In this webinar, it is a privilege that none of us on this call have to be essential workers that are there at the grocery store, that are truck drivers, that, the healthcare workers, but also the sanitation workers who are cleaning up the hospitals, right? That are that also don't have PPE. And so to that point, words have meaning, and there has to be intentionality around those words, and we can't use them interchangeably. And it's not actually, and I'm so glad what you said, Siobhan, about being understanding what the words mean, because I think folks have always been like, oh, we're just trying to be politically correct here. No, we're actually not trying to spread the wrong information. And the difference between oxygen mask and a ventilator, when to call your doctor or call 911, those are different things, right? And so I would encourage you all, as you're sharing information, to check the news source, because there's a lot of things going around the internet. I would caution that you know, even if you're sharing an article from a major news outlet that we trust, most of the time they cite their research, they cite their references, and you go find it yourself so that you are informed and you're not just sharing what is on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram because it's a great meme and it's catchy, but you're sharing the right information so that you yourself as a responsible, trusted voice and messenger, because a lot of people believe they're trusted messengers around them a bit more sometimes in the news. And so you have to take that responsibility seriously. And so we'd be happy to follow up with some of the words that, you know, you should be careful about this during this cycle. I also think we should be conscious about glorifying a bit of our stay at home. You know, I saw like the first few weeks, people were doing these challenges of like showing their stuff. And I literally saw something, it was like a Gucci bag challenge. And like people were posting these things, like line up all of your Gucci items. And I'm sitting here like, wait a minute, people are losing their jobs. People are literally losing their jobs, losing their lives, losing both, can't hug their family and friends, can't get married, whatever it may be. And so words have meaning, as well as some of the trends that you're seeing on social media and media, they also have meaning. And I would be really conscious of that right now.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
we will definitely take you up on that, like sharing some of those tools. So for everyone joining, we always follow up with everyone afterwards with a link. So Alencia, we will share that. We'll share that with the folks. I did want to ask Mariana something, because Mariana, you know the news landscape, you know, I would say better than anyone here right now, having worked for so many years in the news. And one thing that I'm seeing is that information sharing is not as simple as it can be. And with the inundation, with all of the news, you know, there are some questions in there around like our target audiences. Are people really digesting the information as they can? And one of my favorite things about your platform, Mariana, is you will do it in English and then you will also do it in Spanish. You will write it in English and you will also write it in Spanish to be inclusive of your community. And I did want you to talk a little bit about that, because that's a lot of effort to just do that for everything. But we do appreciate that you go the extra step to make sure all communities are especially in Latinx communities who might not be understanding what's going on right now. And we are seeing a lot of obvious things that are out there. This is not fake news, but Black and brown communities are being impacted at larger rates than other communities. So again, I'm careful with my words because I said something before and someone slammed me for it. But we are being impacted at larger rates. So Mariana, can you talk about the importance of sharing information to all audiences and keeping it inclusive?
Absolutely. I mean, I worked at Univision for 5 years, and then I crossed over to English language to work at MSNBC, literally left at the beginning of this year. So having lived and breathed in both communities and communicated to both audiences, I know how important it is. I know that our farm workers, who many of whom don't have masks right now, but are working 24/7 to put food on our table so that we can get our produce delivered to us, and we're not at risk, but they are. Those are folks that many of them don't speak English. So you definitely need to meet people where they are. If you are a member of one of these communities, especially our Black and brown communities that are disproportionately being affected, become a bridge, become a vehicle, become an ambassador for that community. I've had organizations from the Census Bureau reach out to me, to NGOs that are putting out information in Spanish and saying, like, you are an influencer who has sort of the pulse on the street, if you will, como que el dedo en la calle. So can you put this information out there? And that's what right now, instead of posting Gucci bags, that's what I will gladly create content around. Humbly, if that's what I'm called to do, I realize the importance of doing it. And sometimes when I'm just putting out information in English, just even a few keywords in Spanish, you know, Raki and I have been, you know, doing it. We've been working together for the past year. I always start with the "Hola mi gente," this is what I'm talking about today. People turn around and they're like, oh my God, she gets me, you know, like it's a little wink to them, being like, I'm one of you, and if you need to ask me any further questions in Spanish, like I'm here and I speak the language. So let's all be bridges. And I think for small businesses that are watching this right now, you need to find ambassadors and people that are messengers and are in touch with these communities to actually know, okay, if these farm workers who don't have any health care, who are out there also dealing with COVID, their kids are US citizen kids, but many people don't even know these families are mixed status families because they just assume, okay, everybody doesn't have papers and they're all farm workers and they're not Americans. No, no, no. They're mixed status families. This is their composition. You need somebody to kind of tell you what they're about so that your messaging can be conveyed authentically and can resonate. I think what all of you said before in terms of the use of words is hugely important. I'm going to give people a simple example because, you know, we may be talking macro level, but something like, you know, I posted yesterday a photo of me at home and I said, isolation is an act of self-assessment and social. And then I questioned myself and I said, okay, maybe if somebody doesn't feel safe at home, it's not an act of self-assessment and soul searching. You know, there's domestic violence issues that could be at play here. There's people that may be living in situations where they're not at peace, you know, and reflecting on the future. So I switched it to isolation in a place where you feel at peace is an act of self-assessment. So everything you put out, Valencia, you said it, you are accountable for everything you repost and every single word that you put out there. Words matter. And I think here we also should talk about positive words. You know, I started, and this is an exercise that I'm planning for one of my upcoming speeches, to actually develop a vocabulary of positivity. You know, sometimes you catch yourself saying like, I'm stuck at home, instead of saying, I'm able to spend so much more time at home than before. I think we need to also change. You know, I literally started like, okay, with the letter A, how many positive adjectives can I come up with the letter A today? You know, because you find yourself maybe in this cycle of negativity and it has everything to do with what you're manifesting and what you're putting out. And then finally, I would encourage people doing a lot of reading also about what's happening around the world. I think, you know, I come from a country, Venezuela is my home country. I've been lining up for food and medicine for the past 5 years there. My dad died from the flu down there 2 years ago because of a lack of medicine. Puerto Rico went through that. People in Ecuador, you know, they literally have corpses lining up in the streets. Like, take a look at what's happening in the rest of the world so that sometimes when you use the words like prison or like, you know, we're lining up for supplies, like, you know, are you really like, let's put it in perspective with what's going on elsewhere. I think this is a time where the world is more isolated than ever before, but it also can be as interconnected as possible. And the only way that we're really going to come out of this is with global solidarity, with understanding the processes that are going on elsewhere and being humble and being like, they got it right, or that leader is doing a good job over there in that country. I think we can, you know, adopt some of those messages here. So really being humble and looking outside to also take a look inside, which sometimes is contrary to what we see our leaders in Washington doing.
No, that's, I mean, I think that brings up a really good point. And take note, influencers and content creators out there that are on your platforms. And some people, you know, this is your job. You have to be on your platform. You have to be able to put out pieces of information every day. And for some folks, it's a way to seek a little bit of solace, like, or normalcy of like, okay, you know, we see a lot of trends, you know, at Sky Blue Media, we do a lot of social listening, and we'll say, here's one of the biggest trends right now. Oddly enough, bread baking is the biggest trend on social media right now, bread baking. So
specifically banana
bread. I was going to say banana bread, but somebody tried to, again, flag me for that earlier, but banana bread is one of the biggest trends. So Siobhan, I'd love to hear, you know, because this is a time where people are taking most of their communications online via, you know, Instagram, Facebook, social media, like across the board. Where are you seeing areas of opportunity for people to really like enhance their communications or utilize those different words. And again, because you're monitoring, conversations as well, would love to hear that. And Alencia and Mariana, if you have any thoughts to that.
So when it comes to utilizing your social media, when it comes to like growing or just really bringing back that normalcy, I think that people have been doing it amazingly for the most part. There's always a few, but there's definitely for the most part, people are coming together, one, still staying authentic to their purpose and their vision of what their social media that they've created, but also coming together and sharing other social medias, also other communities, other influencers, other small businesses, connecting more with their audience because they have the time. A friend of mine who I think she's been doing social media great is Scotty Beam. I'm not sure if you're familiar. Scotty is, to me, one of great, and people won't think she is. Some people will say that she's not because it's not like a social media strategy or it's not like a clean. She's very authentic to who she is. Yesterday, she hosted a live, and she's very much into music and hip hop culture. She hosted a live that was an open mic. I had not seen anybody do an open mic live yet on Instagram, and it was authentic to her. She always makes sure she reaches out to the people who follow her. You will see her repost, answer in the comments. She will teach people with grace and respect if they come for her, for lack of a better term. So things like that, I think, are great opportunities when it comes to social media, making sure that you're connecting with your audience in a graceful and respectful way, making sure that you're using the opportunity to share content from other content creators, making sure that, again, you stick to the authenticity of your own voice and purpose, doing the research, again, because just what Alencia said earlier, she was like, people are trying to be politically correct, but they're spreading the wrong information, and facts and politically correct are not mutually exclusive. So there's so many resources.
That's a quote. That's a quote.
There's so many resources on the internet that and you have nothing but time right now if you are, well, let me not say that because that's actually wrong. People don't have nothing but time. They are actually still working, i.e. me. But people have time to do the additional research. And again, there's a responsibility when you put content out to make sure that content is correct, especially if it's not yours. So if it's something that's supposed to be a fact, make sure that it is actually a fact, not an opinion. And if it's yours and it's your opinion and it proves to be wrong, I think another thing, and it goes back to being graceful, people do not admit mistakes while being graceful. Players mess up. Just lack of a better term, players mess up. People will tweet something that is wrong. People will post something that is inaccurate, that is insensitive. And it's not that you made the mistake, it's how you handle it. And if you are arguing with people in your comments, if you are trying to defend your stance that is clearly inaccurate, then that's where the real issue is. And I think a lot of people will connect with you more if you mess up and then correct your mistakes and learn from your mistakes. So those are just kind of the tips and tricks I have when it comes to your content creation with that.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks. Alencia, were you going to say something?
Yeah, no, I love the piece about if you make a mistake, it's just how you handle it and doing it with grace. Before most all of my jobs I've had, they've had to like vet my social media. And thankfully, since, college, I have been conscious about how I've used social media because I've always been in some like public position. But even still, most recently, someone brought up some things that I had said over 10 years ago that actually, it's depending on what region of the country you're from, it actually isn't that harmful. But who I have evolved into, it is insensitive. And I didn't double down. I took it down. I literally apologized to the people in our research team who found it. And I hit up a few friends who were part of a movement that would have seen it as wrong. And they were like, that's not even you. Like, what in the world? And it was not horrible at all. But from the sake of an inclusive activist, it was something that, wow, people do grow, right? And you think about how elected officials, they change. You think about how our popular culture changes, right? People weren't as accepting of LGBTQ stories until Will and Grace and Ellen normalized them. People weren't as accepting of women having abortions on TV and film until your Shonda Rhimes of the world and things like that, right? And so as our culture shifts, so does our language and so does our view of the world. And that is okay. And unpack that, right? There was a lot of unpacking that a lot of us are doing around people with disabilities and what that means to be able-bodied, and you not just using the right language, but just thinking of the small things that we say and do that perpetuate certain stereotypes, or it erases people within their lived experience. The other thing too about being so authentic to who you are, some of my girlfriends and I, a couple of us, we have a weekly Bible study. We're reading a book together just about growing our faith and really maximizing this time right now. And a couple of things that came from that was, one, it is okay to take a break from the news. It is okay to take a break from posting the doomsday post, right? Like sometimes we have to do that. If it is authentic to you to show a recipe once a week or to talk about an outfit, and now it's your work from home cute small business sweatshirt or whatever, or your analysis of a new TV show that you've been watched, share that content, because share it in a natural way, because someone does want to receive that. Someone does want a quick break from that. And then when we talk about our audience, this is what we were talking about the other night when we were convening. At times, I think when we're putting out content, we think more of who is our audience, how many people we're going to engage. Because I do understand that generates revenue, whether from like sponsored content or does it get you sales to your product or whatever it may be. However, if it comes from that divine place and it is that urge to just get it out, to me, I've said it doesn't matter if my audience is of 1 or 100. If that person is moved or touched by that, if I had to get that out, then it was successful, it was impactful. I think our measurement of impact when it comes to our messaging has to be fluid and flexible depending on who it is that we're trying to reach and what message and what we're trying to convey, because sometimes a message can go out and 100 people can see it and maybe retweet it, but if another message goes out and 10 people are moving to action, they're going to another organization and talking about those issues, or they're donating to X, Y, and Z. Those 10 people could be a little more activated than the 100 people who just wanted to share or like the post. So be compelled and be led by what you feel innately the world is calling for you to put out there.
And just to go off of that really quick, I literally had a consultation last week where I was telling somebody that they were just kept talking about growing their audience. And I'm like, great, you can buy followers off of a website, but that the reach doesn't matter if it doesn't resonate. So you can have 1 million people following you and your brand is not strong. They're not loyal to your services or products because you've never actually resonated with them. So now you just have people looking and scrolling past versus someone seeing your name or your handle and they're like, wow, I know who this person is. I feel this is like my friend in my head, or I love this brand, or now they're thinking of you. Hey, you know somebody who takes pictures? Oh yeah, actually this person, because they resonate with you and it's just not someone who's trying to just post just to post.
I agree. And that piggybacking off that, and Alencia, what you said, I think this is a time I'm seeing something that I recommend. It is a trend that has been happening in journalism, but I think it applies to everything else, which is process journalism, right? Everybody's already getting the headlines from Twitter. You're bombarded with notifications in your phone. People want you to take them on the journey. Like, be honest and transparent about what that process is. Like, listen, I may not have all the answers, or we're just trying this out. We want to connect with you. That's also what we were talking about, being humble, accepting mistakes when you make them. But I think when we look to the leaders that are really resonating with people right now, Governor Andrew Cuomo or Dr. Fauci, those are people that will say, I don't have all the answers. You know what? I'm going to talk to some experts and then I'm going to come back. And then when they actually do say, like, I do have the answers to this, everybody believes them because they've been led in the process with them. It's the transparency and the authenticity behind every single messaging, every post, and everything you do. And then to what you were saying, Shio, I think And this is something in my first TED Talk, I talked about discovering what makes you special. So what you were saying, Alencia, I think this is a time to also, as a brand, as a person, as a small business, to say, you know what, we're going to take this week off to really think about what we stand for, to think about what our brand is aligned with, what are our colors, what is your logo. This is almost like branding, like a baptism of sorts. And we're all, if you think about it, we're all sort of in a cocoon, and we're going to come out, you know, to a new reality, to a new world. So this is a time to also do a lot of that introspection, to make sure that it's not about the followers, but to make sure that everything is aligned, consistent, and authentic.
Yeah. Mariana, a question just came in for you. Someone said, is there a translation website small businesses or entrepreneurs can use to accurately communicate with Spanish speaking or other language speaking consumers?
Don't do Google Translate.
Okay. Oh,
At all.
Don't do Google Translate. Okay.
I think that, again, it goes back to ambassadors. If you can really find someone from this community, country, that speaks that language, that is a native speaker, I think that's the best thing, because you even within Spanish, there are words that mean different things in different countries. So ideally, find somebody that can really tell you, like, this is good. You know, I again, if you want to run anything by me, also, like, I'm available. But platforms that are, you know, working, that I found, there's a website called Fluence. It's actually run by a woman named Sonia Hill, who I know, and she works in teaching people languages, translation services. So she's definitely someone that I would recommend. A lot of people I know, you know, are sort of more in the Duolingo vein, etc. I haven't personally tried them out. Fluence I know works well, and then find that ambassador in that community. It also works to sometimes those words that you may find are hard to translate or a little tricky, or you want to know the context in which they were said. Sometimes even just putting them on Twitter and seeing what the conversation is around those words. So you're like, oh, this is a bad word, or oh, this is the way it's being used in the Latinx space or in the Spanish speaking space, is always, you know, as you would check with everything, check the context in which it's being used.
One thing that I did want to mention, we're working with an organization, a company, an artificial intelligence company called Hello Alice. So for right now, of the moment, they have a COVID business resource center. So if you go to Hello Alice, they have a Spanish guide for small businesses. So that could also, Mariana, I'd love for you to check it out and give us your thoughts around that, but it does offer that for small business. Siobhan, a question just came in for you around social media and the content space. And folks want to know, hold on, the question just, as a content creator working in technology, how do you remain authentic in your tone and voice while building culture content?
I'm very, oh, is there an echo? I hear one. Is there an echo? I hear one. We're good?
Yep, we're good.
Okay, sorry. So, for me, I am very clear about what my purpose and my messaging is. So even if I'm posting a selfie, you know, you're coming to my page from the beginning, from the bio, from whatever, and you're going to get inspiration, you're going to get jokes, you're going to get pictures of me. I'm not perpetuating myself as a business when I go onto any platform. Working in a tech company, I'm very clear, as I am going to be clear right now. None of my thoughts actually represent the company. So, so none of my thoughts actually represent the company, especially when I am not going as a representative of the company. So being clear, even just like this, I made sure that my title at my job was separate and not on this, because I'm not coming representing my job, though obviously I am an ambassador for my job at all times. My words are my own, my content is my own. And I think once you are clear about what your purpose and your vision is for what you want to put, the messaging that you want to put out into the world, that will guide you. And that will make you, when you're about to post something up, sometimes you're like, does this even make sense? Does this sound like me? Or is this something that I should screenshot and send in my group chat or my homegirl. Like, it's not something that has to be put out into the world. It's not something that always has to be like just spread, but also you need to know the culture of your company. My company is amazing, so luckily we are able to be ourselves, our authentic selves in all parts. So yes, like I have coworkers who follow me, and we still laugh at the things that we share. We share jokes with each other on publicly and privately. So I think it's just who you are and the messaging that you want to put on out, but also knowing your environment, knowing your company, and don't just assume that your company is going to be cool with it. Take some time, pay attention, see what's happening, and making sure that you're in a space that is safe to be your authentic self. And one more part of that, I always say, just because you're bringing your authentic self, that does not mean all of your authentic self. And please be clear, because I am very much somebody who is from the Bronx and very much West Indian, and I'm not coming to work screaming patois and like throwing up the X in the middle. Well, actually, I do throw up the X in the middle of meetings, but I'm not depending on who I'm with. But I don't go into meetings like how I'm talking to myself in a meeting. I'm not going into meetings how I'm talking to my homegirls. I've said, one of my best friend says all the time, you don't go to the corner store like you do to a wedding. Those are still you, but you are not showing up the same. Do not show up the same when you know you are on Twitter and you have a large following of coworkers, or if you're on Instagram and your manager follows you. You show up as your authentic self, but make sure that you are, again, going back to being graceful and respectful and intentional.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Alencia, a question for you. What were some of the biggest lessons you learned about creating nationally engaging conversations? I mean, we're all in a national conversation right now, but I think to all of our points, there are small businesses that need to have their own conversations. But are there any tips that you can share with people, given your background and your expertise in creating nationally engaging conversations?
Yeah, I just have to say, I'm gonna steal that. You don't go to the corner store the same way you go to a wedding, because
my best
that
friend
is
also
such.
went to Temple. She's very smart. She does social media too, so she's hit us with a few quotables.
You got the quotes. She's got the quotes.
No, I also hear that people are always like, oh, respectability politics, you need to censor yourself. No, the reality is, like, the way that I go with my grandmother to church is different than how I'm going with my homegirls, right? Like,
Absolutely.
There's still a way to be authentic. And that folds into the question that you asked me, Rakia. One of the things that I learned really well during my time on President Obama's campaign, I worked a lot with surrogates. Surrogates are people who come out in support of a candidate or on behalf of an organization. So on political campaigns, it's everyone from, Valerie Jarrett and Patrick Gaspard to Hill Harper and Vivica Fox. These are all the people that I was working with, and all the pastors too, on the Obama campaign. And what I was tasked with was getting them all media within national markets, but also local media markets, but also at events, and how are they talking to different constituencies, whether it's the barbershop and beauty salon tours, or is it the church visits, or small business roundtables, because politicians love small business roundtables. And so what I had to figure out was, if we're going to talk about, say, childcare or education, let's actually survey the community that we're going into to not only get their top issue when it comes to, let's take education. So maybe this town in Virginia is worried about pre-K, and maybe this town in North Carolina is worried about school lunches, right? You don't know that until you actually go into the community, hear from people who are directly impacted, so parents, teachers, students, but also the local organizers or the local charter schools, as well as the public school, people on both sides of the conversation. And so that's a very policy focused analogy, but it brings about the conversation of I always say all politics are local, but also all national issues are local as well. All national conversations are local as well. We all may watch, I've been watching Little Fires Everywhere, so we're all watching that, but the conversation that we're having with our girlfriends in our phone or with our family or whoever it is going to be different because we're going to take something different from it. So I would survey the audience that you are trying to engage, and that can be informal, whether it's, you know, your group texts, and all of us have different friend groups that we're group texting with, or some other leaders that you're working with. And you'd also be surprised if you're a small business owner. I'm assuming you're connected to some of the government officials in your area because of all of the things that you have to do to keep your business up and running. You should actually ask them about some of the issues that they care about, or some of the things that they need help communicating within the community. And you never know where you're going to get connected. One of the things I used to say all the time at Planned Parenthood, when we would talk about diversifying the donor base, how do we get more women of color to come to the events that Planned Parenthood was having? It is no secret that when you look at Planned Parenthood, oftentimes it is perceived as a white women's organization. That's the women's movement broadly. So how do you get more women of color, indigenous women, LGBTQ folks into the room? It's actually, you don't invite them to your room. You actually figure out a way to get invited into their home, into their conversations about this, and to how they're engaging with the issue. And so if it's a product that you have or a service that you have, and you're trying to communicate to a new audience, take that national conversation that is kind of related, but then also see what is happening around you in your audience and your community, and figure out how you can be in the middle of it, but also be in an inviting space where you're invited into the conversation, so that it becomes local, personal, however you are distributing your products or your services. And I think that's the key part. It's back to what I said earlier. Most of the time, it's literally not the message, it's the messenger. So most of the time, it's not the product or the service, it is literally you and how you're communicating. And that message is gonna have to, the way it's delivered is gonna have to shift a little bit, just depending on who your audience is, once you've taken that feedback in.
Ooh, and as you said, how you're communicating. So the topic of today is how the communicators communicate. And we have 2 more minutes. So I want each of you rapid fire in these last 2 minutes to give us just some tactical tips and takeaways from you experts, how communicators communicate. How should we be communicating right now? Anything that comes to mind, whether it's a resource, whether it's a tip, whether it's someone that people should follow, I always say, who are you following on Twitter? Because that really shows sort of what your mind is looking like from a news cycle. But give us a couple of tactical takeaways for our small businesses out there.
I'm going to start with something that I literally going through. I had to go through it for my book, and I think this will apply to individuals and businesses as well. Take this time to get to know your story. Do you even know the story of your business or your own story? Do you know the juncture that made you be where you are now, professionally, personally? What's the narrative? What are those moments that marked you, and why did you make certain decisions? You would be surprised at how many people don't even know those answers about themselves. So this is a time to look inside our homes and inside ourselves, which is our ultimate temple. Sit down one weekend. I did it for the book, and it seems unsurmountable, but it isn't as unsurmountable. Just sit down on a Word doc, notes on your phone, and just write it out. And you will find the values that you stand for, what has driven you, and then mistakes that you've made. We've talked about mistakes and owning up to it, and things that you say, okay, I'm going to take this time to really recover from this and change whatever I want to change, go back to whatever I want to go back to, and reimagine the parts of my life and my business that I want to reimagine.
Thank you.
I would, in this moment, we talked about offering grace, but also offer grace to yourself. You know, there have been all these like Twitter versus battles between a lot of the hip hop producers and musicians, and Teddy Riley and Babyface was like the most anticipated verses. And listen, gave us a great night of commentary when they messed up and had technical difficulties. There were two lessons in that, right? The first lesson, Teddy Riley, and don't do the most when it's a very simple task, and that you will be successful, because he came with 10 people in a room and we should have been socially distancing with masks and stuff on, and then the technology failed. But then two, offer yourself some grace. Babyface and Teddy Riley have almost 40-some-year careers, and they couldn't figure out Instagram Live. So if they couldn't figure out Instagram Live, all of us on this call are going to have issues with Zoom. We might put out some content with an error in it. Like, there might be something that literally happens because we are all dealing with, you know, new ways of communicating for some of us. Even my friends who have been doing nothing but digital content are like still trying to learn new tricks and new tools. So those of us who are novices and that are trying to make sure we can do a Zoom call for more than 20-some people, like, be gracious with yourself and be open and honest with it, because compound on that, we are dealing with a pandemic. And so, you know, it is actually encouraging to see some of our greats actually make some mistakes and learning in public. And we can actually do that too. And then back to what everyone was saying here, that makes you very authentic and people will engage. And lastly, about the grace piece too, make sure that you are filling yourself up to produce your best, whether that's, you know, a meditation during the day, a prayer, disengaging from the actual news cycle about COVID for a day, or if you can, whatever it is that you can do to just make sure you're filling yourself up so that you can remain your authentic self and have the best content that you're putting out there.
Siobhan?
So definitely reiterating everything everybody said. The story, making sure you're rooted in your purpose when you post, that the things that you are doing are authentic to yourself. Obviously, the piece where you're giving grace and you're realizing people can't always be perfect. Side note, Teddy Riley actually took those memes and made a whole store of merch of him. So
He
now
sure did.
I was like, wow, a king.
Yep.
So like
TV show offers, he's gonna have all of it.
He's gonna have all of it. But what I said before, also being honest with yourself, is just knowing that today is not the day for this. And yes, okay, I may have wanted to roll this out. Can I really push through, or do I need to like lay down and get through money heist for this day and then come back to this tomorrow? Like that. And I think the last thing I want to leave everybody with is that you literally can probably do anything you want to, but you cannot do everything. Ask for help, but not the Holy Spirit.
That just hit me right on my shoulder. You just said a word. That was a whole Sunday sermon, but keep going.
You can do anything, but you cannot do everything. So when you are trying to have your small business, you have resources. You can do call out on Twitter, on Instagram, easier on Twitter, just an FYI, but you can do it anywhere. But you could also lean on your friends. You can look for free resources, do the research, but you trying to do everything yourself is going to make you have an unsuccessful business, unsuccessful content. It's not going to be what you want to put out, and it could be so much better if you just lean on other people and ask for the help that you need. So
wow, that was definitely a word. I mean, as you guys know, I'm an entrepreneur. I own an agency. I have an amazing team, and it is great to be able to rely on other people and not to have to do everything yourself. I just remember in those earlier days just having to do everything myself, and it is a detriment to your health. Like, you can't give yourself grace if you are trying to do things yourself. But I know that there are people out there, the solopreneurs, the artpreneurs. I like what you said about the call outs on Twitter and Instagram. Our former chief of staff coined the phrase friend tour, and she said get your friend tour advisory board together. So Valencia,
Absolutely.
to your girlfriends and all of those people like behind those group texts, there's somebody, you know, like hyping the other person up. So I appreciate it. I consider you all my friend tours. Best to your family, Siobhan. Mariana, thank you so much for your wisdom and knowledge. Alencia, thank you for your insight, wisdom, and knowledge. Siobhan, thank you for those tools and gems that you left us with. We appreciate you. We are grateful. We are thankful. Be well. Have a
I'm gonna
great
do one
evening.
Instagram story if anybody wants to say hi. Hey.
Hi.
Woo.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Rakia. Thank you so much.
All
It
right,
was
take
nice.
care, guys. All right.
Bye.
Oh.
Thank you.